Hey everybody, Jason Bermas here. We've got another great independent media alliance panel for you. This one on Palantir, featuring the likes of Ryan Christian from The Last American Vagabond, Steve from Slow News Day, Derek Bros from The Conscious Resistance, and much more. It's a banger of an episode, going to be 2 parts. You're not going to want to miss it. Please consider supporting the broadcast. Buckle up and get ready to make sense of the madness.
Friday, June 6th, 2025. Welcome to the Independent Media Alliance. We're here to discuss Palantir. Obviously, not even much more is needed to explain what that conversation is regarding today, seeing as how it's everywhere. In a very interesting way, it seems to have consumed even the corporate media conversation. And so we thought it was very relevant to have this panel to discuss from start to finish, where this came from, what it's about, how it built into what it is now, where it seems to be going, and a lot of other kind of identity politics around it all. So I thought it'd be interesting to start with, of course, briefly discuss the interesting kind of feud between the two, not because of the entertainment of it all, but because of how interesting the timing is between Elon Musk and Donald Trump and how that might relate to the Palantir point. And so I'll go ahead and just start with my point that I think it's interesting, the timing of how this feud played out. I personally think that it seems very like there are elements that seem to be some kind of a personality clash. I thought that was obvious with their egos, but I'm not really buying it. Some of it feels a little bit staged. And I'm just wondering if that might be done to pull away from the very clear awareness from all sides, including the corporate media, which I don't take at face value, of the Palantir database. So just whoever wants to jump in, what are your thoughts on that?
I'll just share real quick. It's been interesting the last week because I noticed, right away the spike in discussion around Palantir and, on Twitter and everywhere else. And I was like, okay, what's going on? And found the New York Times story, which, by the way, I think myself, Whitney, and others here have reported essentially everything that's in there other than them claiming, according to some anonymous sources, this is going on. I know I did videos when Trump did that first executive order that they were discussing, which is kind of removing some barriers between different agencies. So it's been interesting to kind of, watch that play out, not only, as you said, Ryan, in the mainstream, but then seeing the way MAGA's treating it. And I'm sure we're going to get more into this, but, just off the top of my head, the ones I'm sure you guys have all heard that we already have surveillance. This is no big deal. What are you guys tripping about? Like, it's not any different. So whatever, or the, of course, Q and other hopium crowd. This is actually to surveil the deep state. They're not going to be spying on regular people. They're going to use Palantir to suss out which of the deep state agents are involved in these crimes. Yes, there are articles and Substacks and things of that sort and Twitter threads all claiming that. So yeah, it's been interesting to watch this. Of course, I think in general, the fact that everybody's talking about Palantir, probably a good thing. And of course, there's a lot more angles, but yeah, that's been my initial thoughts this first week or so, that everyone's finally waking up to it.
And then the feud. And if I may, Jason, I know you're the one who usually calls like the MMA fights and stuff like that, but I feel like what's happening right now deserves more of a classic, late 90s, early 2000s WWE style promo. And for what's really going on, I feel like it's more of like a Sunday, Elon Musk versus Donald Trump in the squared circle, and then all of a sudden they're going to wind up being tag team partners in like 3 weeks. Again, like they're going to have the dramatic falling out. And somebody's going to get flipped over a table like Vince McMahon did, back when Donald Trump flipped him over a table. Maybe someone ritualistically shaved Elon's head. Maybe we get the full cartoon out of it. But what this looks like to me at the moment, when the only company that Elon Musk owns that isn't fully subsidized by U.S. taxpayers through federal government contracts in Tesla was tanking, all of a sudden, now he's mad at Donald Trump, and like clockwork, liberals are like, oh, well, Elon's mad at Donald Trump. I guess we like him again. We'll go ahead and buy Tesla. And I mean, it's just, it is predictability to the point of laughability, except for it's actually happening in the world that we live in. And I'm in the North Bay in California, in Marin County, where like we've driven by Elon Musk protests and the big Tesla dealership right up the road, and it's been cartoonish the entire time. So to watch the fallout play out this way, as scripted as I believe it is still, it's got high entertainment value.
So let me jump in here really quick on it because, for me, I do wonder how much of this, even if it is real, does it matter? Are any of his defense contracts going away? Is the Boring Company not going to be building underground bases? Obviously, there was a little bit of tossing around in the media about NASA and SpaceX leaving NASA. It can't leave NASA. That's not a real thing. That's like imagination land times 1,000. I did hear something interesting today that just did come to mind. Literally an hour ago, Roger Stone was on InfoWars, and he was talking about the big, beautiful bill and the part of the Golden Dome initiative inside of it. And I've been doing videos on this even before the bill, that this is essentially, to me, is a software and hardware update of the capabilities that were put out there in the 80s and 90s. And I even went back to Edward Teller, who's huge in UFO lore, who was the head of this program, and he was giving press conferences and baselining what reality was versus fiction there. And of course, you can take that with a grain of salt. But I do believe that that is actually happening. Like, that's a big push. I think they're doing that no matter what bill passes. I don't know whether that's really a contention with Musk or he feels like he's getting cut out. You have to realize Starlink right now is an extension of that program. It is the commercial program. The Defense Department has a backdoor into it. And when they launch those satellites, which again, the highest concentration right now of the dishes is still in Ukraine, because it's not just communication systems, it's directly into those AI drones that I'm sure we're going to be discussing that Anduril, Palantir are so fond of. And that's a big part of it. But you also have to realize that DARPA has been putting up their Blackjack network through Musk. Again, NASA, SpaceX, that's just another rebrand. They're not going anywhere. So I think it is a personality clash. I've always questioned how much Musk is really running these companies in the first place. And even with Tesla, yes, you have that car part, but we have to also realize that they're the autonomous robot company as well. They're the ones that are bringing in the humanoid Optimus bot. So I think a lot of this is smoke and mirrors. You know, Derek just mentioned that Palantir was getting some mainstay play and pushback from the new conservative alt media, which I think is a good thing. But I don't think people understand the extent to which they're already involved, right? So that I hope that we could talk about that mostly, like where they all already are at and all these other companies. And basically, I don't even know that they're vying for supremacy. I think that they're vying for their spot as the next Raytheon, Lockheed Martin in that circle. But that's my opinion.
Oh, well, since Jason Bassler is joining, he's going to jump in right there. I was going to say, let's go to him next. Nice to have you on for the first time on the panels, brother. So go ahead and jump in.
Thank you, man. Yeah, nice to be with you guys. A bunch of legends in here. I was just going to point out briefly that don't forget Trump and Elon were kind of at odds with each other even before the bromance began. Like, I remember Trump said something like Musk is a bullshit artist. Musk said that Trump is too old to run. So I don't know if they really even had this the connection to begin with. Maybe this was all just the smoke and mirrors. Maybe this is all just the optics and the facade, you know? And yeah, Palantir, obviously, as Derek pointed out, we mentioned here already, like, was blowing up. I mean, I've gotten more traction on just the past few days on my Twitter account than I have in a couple months talking about Palantir. And I noticed as well that the right, they were questioning it. Like, they thought it was fake news coming from the New York Times, rightfully so. But it just goes to show how far behind they are the ball when it comes to Palantir and these topics and the technocracy and everything that's kind of going hand in hand with AI and this infrastructure being built behind the scenes. And if it was a distraction, this whole Elon Trump thing, it'd certainly be good timing because the right is kind of clueless to all this. So like, when would there be a better time to, throw this out there? And maybe, yeah, the bromance is over because the theatrics and the show of the election's over, and they had to kind of break it off anyway and go their separate routes. And I know Derek pointed out my rebuttal tweet on Elon's bombshell post there, which basically was like, this is, the only path that you have left, Elon, is to go towards voluntarism. And not necessarily because I thought he was going to do that, but it was more just a plug for the ideology itself. But yeah, all this to me, it definitely seems suspicious, and it seems like perfect timing to really cover up the conversation that seemed to be formulating about Palantir.
Well, if anybody else wants to comment on it, we don't all have to, if I think a lot of that's been addressed, but if anyone wants to jump in, Kid or Charlie, go ahead. I'll just add that I think both are possible. I agree with what you said there, Jason. Let's not forget it. Most of his inner circle, right before they got inside the inner circle, were like, Trump's an idiot. He's a grifter. All of them, including JD Vance and everybody, Elon Musk. And so maybe they never really liked each other. Maybe they always hate each other, but they also work together. So I'm of the mind that there's a larger one government agenda. And so it's hard not to see some of this ego kind of split being real, but it also could be, both can be true is the point. And I think
Ryan,
that's important.
you didn't mention one important name that I think is like the name we need to mention, Peter Thiel. Talk about leaving. Peter Thiel was his technology advisor in the first administration. Then when it was very clear that there was massive corruption in the 2020 election, you'd already seen Thiel distancing himself, but he totally and completely abandoned him at that point. And you didn't really hear much from the Thiel crowd, I would say, until about 18 months before the election. I think when they realized, hey, maybe he's not going to jail, maybe he's going to beat these things, maybe we get it on board. Then all of a sudden Vance comes into the picture. That is Peter Thiel, Palantir 101. And then you really saw, they say it's Barron Trump. Barron said, podcast pop, that's what you need to do. I question that. I'm not saying that his kid's not smart and that wasn't brought in and maybe pushed him into it, but that very, very much looked like a concerted effort by, I would say, the new technocrats, if you will, to push him in that arena. When you saw Thiel alone on Joe Rogan just before the old Trump star, and they're talking Epstein, which is another obviously huge part of this thing that we're talking about right now, I knew something was up. And I kind of already realized that, Trump on this podcast tour was going to end at Rogan, and lo and behold, that's exactly what happened. And what was that a predecessor by? Elon Musk on there as well. So I think it's almost impossible, right, not to talk about these things. I think there are personality and power clashes. Another big thing happening right now is that Thiel is about to meet with his quote-unquote left-wing counterpart, Eric Schmidt, and now Jen Stoltenberg, who is a steering member on Bilderberg in Sweden next week. And that's not being talked about by any of the alt media. There's literally not one mainstream story on the upcoming meeting. God bless Charlie Skelton, Dan Dix, and others that are going out to cover it, because this year's really important.
Well, I think that's
I'll just add one more thing related. I was just going to add one thing to the whole feud thing before we kind of move full on to Palantir and Peter Thiel. For those who out there, my personal belief, I think maybe most of us, but I know we have differing opinions, is that Trump has been an op from the beginning. That's my longtime belief for any potential positive. And I think that's been borne out over time, like him being brought in to be a disruptor because of, all his relationships and things that they may have on him. But for those who don't have that view in the audience and who are more inclined to think Trump is good or good to some degree, things of that sort of thing, and believe that it's the deep state, even in the form of Elon Musk, working against him. I saw a theory out there that I think is worth at least putting into people's consciousness, and the idea that even if Trump was fully with Musk and the technocrats and the people really pulling the strings, or even if there was some kind of differences, I do think what Jason said is accurate, that it's not whether they get along or not doesn't necessarily mean that they fully agree on everything. I tend to tell people the ruling class is going to agree with each other over the people every day of the week. That doesn't mean they get along every day and don't have their own disagreements. But when it comes to the people or them, they're going to choose to work together and collaborate. And so with that in mind, if you do have this mindset that Trump was trying to fight the deep state, one viewpoint is that Musk and maybe Thiel and others who we know have a relationship going back to the PayPal mafia. And as Jason mentioned, Thiel with JD Vance, we all know he funded JD Vance's Senate run. And Peter Thiel did in the end come out last year and say that he supported Trump and Vance. He wasn't going to give money, but he did indirectly give money in other ways. But nevertheless, if you took that view, it could be possible that they helped Trump get in there, got all their minions in place, because as I've reported, Doge is full of Palantir and Peter Thiel acolytes, as is Trump's administration, from Vance on down to many other powerful people, and then stage or have a real breakup and break things off from Trump. And at that point, maybe they don't care because they've already got all their guys and all their pieces in place, right? So that's a charitable view, I think, for the Trump folks. I don't really, again, see Trump as a hero defending, the American people against the deep state. But either way, it could be that there's some element of that, that they've got everything done. The whole thing could just be a distraction to distract us, as Jason Bassler was saying, that, last week, everybody's talking about Palantir, and now it's about this, and is Trump in the Epstein files? And that's a whole other thing, right? But it's the trending thing of the week. And my belief, and I think most of us here, we understand the role that the algorithm plays. There's always going to be some thing for us to be outraged every week or to be trending and for us to be talking about. And we're playing right into it in many ways. It's important to dissect them, but I do think the bigger picture is Palantir and the role that they're playing.
Absolutely. And I think the whole point of that being discussed is because it's hard to decouple these things. And I think, whether it's just the kind of theater of it all and whether that relates to the story or, the involvement of both of them in this large idea. And so to my point was that if you saw the story coming out, and which we all know that Elon was, at least as now more so framed, was the main reason that Thiel was involved with the administration. And you start to wonder if he's just kind of being framed as the scapegoat for why this all happened. Even Palantir, even the database, everything, Doge, investigations. I think some people would take that bait. And so I thought it was worth just kind of tossing that around to consider how that might play a factor. And so let's talk about in general, and then I'll just show this too, since you guys mentioned it. This was the statement that kind of did add a little bit of that's hard to pretend like this would be stated if it wasn't, basically Elon Musk just says time to drop the big bomb and says that Trump's in the Epstein files, which is what we were referring to. So it's hard to see that as a play, but I do think they're in a desperate position. I think the Palantir discussion is really uncomfortable for the entire government, partisanship aside. So let's start with a discussion of Palantir itself. If anybody wants to start, Derek, you're a good one to go to in regard to kind of the background. If you want to just talk about what Palantir is and where it came from.
I'll add a couple of things.
I'd like to talk about the total information awareness kind of overlap and where it got to today. So anybody wants to jump in, but go ahead, Derek, you can start.
Should we have everybody introduce themselves too as well? I saw some comments asking who different faces are, because I know we've got a couple new people.
Yeah. I tend to not.
And they were asking about myself and Kit and Jason. Well, just maybe as you go around, not necessarily right this second, but they were asking about me and Kit and Jason. I'm Derek Bros from the Conscious Resistance Network. So whoever.
Yo, everybody. Jason Bassler, Free Thought Project, and Police the Police.
Charlie Robinson from Activist Post and Macroaggressions.
Kit Knightley from Off Guardian.
My name is T. Snyder. You can find me at theconspiracysynergy.com.
There you
go. Jason Bermas, I didn't realize it was backwards. I really hate these settings that mirror your image for no reason. We're going to try to save that. We all know where to find me.
Just for that note, that's just my, I think it's important to do that. I'm just so adverse. I barely even say my name when I start my show. So if that's something, feel free to do that every time, guys. And I did see someone ask about some people there. So thank you, Derek. But back to the point on that, if you want to jump in, I think it's important for those that may not know the, kind of the connected point to total information awareness, even today more so with main core and kind of how it played a role before today. So go ahead.
Yeah, that's actually where I wanted to start. And I do want to credit two people who are part of the IMA who are not here today, both James Corbett and Whitney Webb, who've been, among others here, writing about Palantir for some time. And so I encourage people to go check out Unlimited Hangout. Whitney actually did a collaborative investigation with Jeremy Lafredo back in 2020 called Palantir's Tiberius Race and the Public Health Panopticon. And it was really about the relation to COVID, because there's a whole history there. There's a whole history of COVID, and Palantir. But what you're talking about, Ryan, I think is really the key point. And whoever doesn't have their mic muted, if you guys don't mind, I'm hearing a little feedback. The total Information Awareness Program was started after 9/11, for those who might not remember, and it's the one you've seen out there, I'm sure, that has the all-seeing eye pyramid logo looking over the world. And because it was controversial, it's as weird as it sounds, and I keep trying to remind people of this, that just 20 years ago, people actually did give a crap about privacy. That's been lost in such a short time. But 20 years ago, even with all the 9/11 hysteria, a lot of people were concerned and were speaking out about this program that was really seeking to monitor all of our lives in many ways that have now been achieved. So there was actually some pushback. It went from being called Total Information Awareness to the Terrorist Information Awareness Program. They had to change it to try to soften it. But by the end of 2003, it ended up being shut down because of the controversy. Now, that's at least the mainstream story. I think we all know that they just took the different pieces of that program and kind of distributed them among different agencies. And it's around this time that Palantir is getting started. And Whitney and Jeremy, they mentioned this article from, I think it was 2003. It was a New York Magazine report that talked about how John Poindexter, who comes from U.S. intelligence and military, he actually met up with Peter Thiel and Alex Karp, who, by the way, are both steering committee members of the Bilderberg Group. And as Jason said, Bilderberg's getting ready to meet. And they met with the Poindexter, then basically got all the tips and information they needed to start a private surveillance program that they couldn't do through the government with Total Information Awareness. So that's basically the start of Palantir. And of course, besides Peter Thiel's own investments, the CIA's venture capital firm Enquetel was their first investment. So from the beginning, from 2003 or 2004, sometimes they say they were founded in 2004. It looks like they may have been started earlier than they claim. There's a lot of kind of uncertainty about that. But yeah, from the very beginning, the CIA, through the venture capital firm and through Poindexter and the Total Information Awareness Program, were directly intertwined and interconnected to Palantir and Alex Karp and Peter Thiel. And since then, of course, now 20 years later, they're very influential. They now have this massive relationship with Trump's second White House, and they're helping kill Palestinians. I mean, they're involved with all kinds of different things that we've been covering recently at TLAV, which is why I've started to call this the Palantir World Order.
I think it's something crazy like 30 different agencies Palantir's interwoven themselves within.
Yeah. Well, I mean, on that note, so go ahead and elaborate on that, Jason. Do you mean in the regard to like previously in just the overlap, or specifically with like the AI data mining discussion of today? Because it's gotten even worse with that.
I don't know that for sure, but I do know that, as Derek was just saying, that this has been something that's been going on through the Obama administration, through the Biden administration, the first Trump administration. I would assume that there is definitely overlap with the AI stuff, but yeah, I couldn't tell you for sure. But
yeah,
if you guys don't mind me jumping in just really quick, this might be a little off track, maybe jumping ahead just slightly, but I do need to go in a few minutes. But I did want to talk about some of the predictive policing stuff, because that's important to me. I think you guys probably know, most of you guys know, I've been doing Police the Police, and the Free Thought Project is really focused on police accountability over the past decade. And we've seen a lot of similar stories that's come up around the predictive policing that has involved innocent people. And this is something that definitely worries me, because Palantir builds the software that basically aggregates the data for various law enforcement records. They take surveillance footage, license plate readers, social media stuff, and it's all to identify hotspots where crimes might occur. Flag individuals as potential offenders or associates based on their network or past behavior. It generates risk scores for people, often without their knowledge or consent. And this has already been happening. I think it was Los Angeles in 2009, 2010. They had what's called a laser program. And same thing with New Orleans. They actually partnered with the New Orleans Police Department without any public knowledge or city council approval to implement these predictive systems that track the gang members and affiliates. And that's kind of just crazy and by itself, that they're just kind of subverting any type of local government, and it's, putting themselves in that position. And these predictive algorithms, they generate the risk scores and all that stuff. But as Larry Ellison said, who was on stage with Trump when he announced the $500 billion Stargate project last year, he said citizens will be on their best behavior. And he basically elaborated that AI would monitor various sources, including security cameras, police body cameras, and he said that AI would monitor all those things, including vehicle dash cams. And as I was saying, this is worrisome because these systems fail at arresting, all the time. They arrest innocent people. There's no due process. Raises questions about like bias algorithms, and if cops are wearing body cameras that use this real-time facial recognition to analyze people that they come in contact with, it's definitely going to end up in a database somewhere. I should also mention that the license plate readers in the U.S. is exploding. The ACLU reports that roughly 85% of law enforcement agencies deploy these license plate readers. I'm sure you guys have all heard about flock cameras. There's over 42 states, 4,000 cities that have these flock cameras in them. And Forbes last year reported that FedEx had partnered with flock cameras to put on these license plate readers on their trucks. And FedEx isn't the only people too. It's Kaiser Permanente, it's Lowe's, it's quite a few different places. Of course, Amazon Ring, and they all collaborate with law enforcement. Apparently, there's one company called the Digital Recognition Network. It claims it's a subsidiary of Motorola. It claims it's produced 250 plate readings a month, and it's amassed 23 billion license plate scans since its inception. So, if we're talking about building databases, like all this stuff is going to be put in there. It's going to be, flagging people, and basically algorithms are going to be predicting what they do. So it destroys due process, and it really shifts policing from evidence-based action to preemptive suspicion.
And it's hard not to overlap that with many other things and many other topics, but many other things around the world, like we saw with, for example, what's happening with the genocide in Gaza and the testing of those things using threat scores to determine certain people with the AI. It's the same thing. But even the overlap you discussed with things like the way things are going in places like Prospera, the teal-backed libertarian, a dictatorial, authoritarian government is taking over Honduras, or in El Salvador. There's different overlaps to all of this, and you can see the same building aspects of this. And you pointed out the agency point, and so it goes. Well, actually, before I go into that, anybody else have any comments on the police overlap? And I'll take a step back on that because I want to go into all the different agencies that you were mentioning there. But the police part goes back a long way, and then I'll let anybody jump in. Well before this, and remember, this is Trump's last administration, and then it even overlapped through Biden's administration. And so this is nonpartisan, and it's been building for a long time. And the police part is just now dovetailing with everything else, it seems. So anybody else have any thoughts on that?
I just want to add quickly that Teslas are snitch vehicles. They have contracts with fusion centers. Ford Motor Company is trying to do something very similar with a lot of pushback. There's new surveillance up for speed cameras. 33, in fact, brand new speed detection cameras have been placed all over the city of San Francisco and on the bridges and stuff like that. It's going to a point to where people are going to be forced into the driverless vehicle, because every time you get behind the wheel, broadly, most motorists can commit some sort of infraction. It's just something that everybody does a little bit all the time, whether or not you're a little bit over the speed limit, or you fail to, hit your brakes at a proper distance, but put your turn signal on at a proper distance. If we're having surveillance done digitally that only knows what the actual motor vehicle code says and isn't even taking into account flow of traffic or any of this other stuff, then everybody's going to get multiple tickets all day, every day.
I mean, it's that old statement about, at any given moment, because of how ridiculous our legal system is and all the laws in place going back decades, centuries, that everyone's, they could make you are all a felon if they want you to be, is the point. I forget how that statement goes, but they've made that clear before. They could just choose to pick the law out that you're breaking, and everyone is at current moment. That's wild. Go ahead, Jason.
I was just going to say they're putting, even in manual cars, they're putting remote control kill switches in. So even if you refuse the auto drive, you're going to have a kill switch. I believe in Europe, they're going to be mandatory in all new cars made after 2015 or something.
Wow.
And the problem is, and we touched on this with the AI thing as well, we're all talking about the idea of pre-crime here, essentially, and that's what it is. But we're talking about the idea of pre-crime working, but it could easily not work. And as we talk about with the AI stuff, people are already throwing over their own judgment, their own ideas for what the AI tells them is true. A police officer in 10 years' time will simply have a facial recognition scan, and it will tell him, yeah, that's the guy. Even if it doesn't look like the photograph, he will override that. And you could end up in some sort of weird Kafkaesque situation where the facial recognition software says you're somebody you're not. And there will be no safeguards in place.
Right. Well, this is a perfect overlap then to, I mean, so the obvious point of where this is built forward and how it's been set up and a nonpartisan idea, you know, this surface level kind of acknowledgement of what's been building or been there, the database of all American information, you know, this overlaps with like the where it's going discussion, the artificial intelligence overlap to the bigger point in all of this. So before we go into all of that, what Jason was saying, Jason Bassler, is just that the point of all the different, I was looking this up this morning just to make sure there wasn't anything new, just so it's on the record. It's so far, and this is my question before about whether you're talking about Palantir and other agencies, other groups, by the way, just simply being involved with the government in a lot of ways and being part of their different agencies. What I'm referring to is that in addition to what we're now discussing of them having access through Doge and other discussions, all of the databases that they've now removed the silos from and pushed them into one central point for the most part, and using them to train their models, their large language models, their AI. This has been publicly discussed. Now, the AI bill, which we can touch on as well, or rather the Trump's bill, I refuse to call it the big, beautiful bill, discussing the idea of 10 years of not oversight for AI and the different AI components to new government, which it looks like the Senate's going to push back on now. But the point is it's there, and it's all comes back to what they're using it for. Now, that's Health and Human Services, the Department of Homeland Security, IRS, ICE, Social Security, the GSA, USAID, Department of Energy, Department of Education, the FAA, FEMA, NIH, National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, and the Treasury Department. And then you can even overlap that with the health side of it with RFK Jr.'s database on health information, or even Oracle overlap with Stargate. All of this using AI, that's almost hard to imagine. You know what I mean? That much information being jammed together. I mean, go ahead. I'll leave it there. I just think that's very important to realize that, you know, in a lot of ways, some of the people, especially in the partisan field, are missing the forest for the trees by talking about this bigger discussion, but not realizing, as we've said, it's been going on a long time and that it's, I think, done at this point, right? I mean, a few more agencies to go, but go ahead. Anyone want to jump in on that?
Well, let me jump in on that because I think it goes beyond agencies, right? So, number one, I think people have to realize that you have a social credit score on Apple if you've ever bought a device or anyone around you has bought a device. Same thing with Google. These things came out, more than a decade ago. I think that you look at other big companies, Microsoft, you got an Xbox, I'm sure, or you're on Windows, they've got something similar there. PlayStation, Sony. I would say that those databases are also going to be incorporated. I didn't name the big one. You know, everybody talked about the Total Information Awareness Network. Well, there's always been those rumblings of a Facebook connection, right? And then you look at Facebook, and really when it was pushed over the top past these other social media platforms, who was it? Peter Thiel stepped in. Sean Parker stepped in. So when you look at that, and you look at these new data centers that are being proposed, the one in Kentucky that's currently being built for Meta, I think that that's going to be as much of an incorporation as those government databases, as the autonomous cars that we were talking about. Basically, when we are talking about total information awareness, we're even getting not only into the Internet of Things being centralized by this AI and analyzed, but also the Internet of Bodies. And, you know, the RAND Corporation and others have been very open about that as well. And look, I'm as guilty as anybody. I got the damn watch on. I take the damn walk and see how quick I do my 2 miles. I wear it when I'm in the car and someone calls me or texts me. I don't want to, you know, touch it. I'll hit that and I'll start talking into this. I know some people aren't as comfortable with that, but I think it's only going to get more. I think that we have to be aware and navigate it, pick and choose our battles. Like, I would be stupid. I've got probably 7 game systems that have been built in the last decade plus. They all have microphones in them. They're in the damn controllers at this point. You know how many phones are sitting around my house right now? Yeah, they're off, but I think that we all know that there are ways to access these things without people knowing. So I think right now, big picture, Palantir is trying to become that like Oracle of the Lord of the Rings. One ring to rule them all that stuff, not just government stuff, but all the public stuff and all the contracting. I mean, really, that is what we've been seeing anyway, is the merger of government and corporations on a techno-fascistic level that's really never been imagined before. But now it's starting to be achieved. And that's like the real danger, right?
Yeah, I think there's the temptation to think that all of this is just starting now, within the last 5 years, whatever. When you go back to 2004, you've got two origin stories happening simultaneously. You have, out of In-Q-Tel, you have Facebook and the Peter Thiel connection that you just mentioned. And you have Palantir starting about the same time, coming out of In-Q-Tel with Karp running that and this role. So you can make a case that this has been on the plan for 2 decades, that this isn't something that's just new. Maybe the technology has caught up. Maybe when Minority Report comes out in 2002, that technology is futuristic. The future's now. Half the stuff that we saw in that movie is happening. Pre-crime was inconceivable 2 decades ago. Now it's normalized almost and talked about as a real thing. So I think that they have been plotting and planning this for a very long time. And the role of these technocrats is extremely dangerous. It's tempting to be dismissive of Elon Musk and go, oh, he's just a quirky nerd who builds companies. But it's like, well, peel back a layer or two and see where this guy's money is coming from. See who the connection is coming from. Much in the same way that Palantir was started to service the CIA. What about Oracle? I mean, Oracle was named after the project that the CIA was, Project Oracle, that they were working on. And so this has been going on since 77 in that regard. So it's a long play. And I think that for those, I put the Palantir conversation in the same category as the USAID conversation. Nothing's changed. Nothing's really getting fixed. But at least some of the normies are starting to talk about it. They didn't know about USAID 3 years ago. I mean, we're all talking about it and doing episodes, but now you've got your hairstylist, maybe not mine, but somebody's hairstylist out there going, what do you make of this whole USAID thing? Well, you could take them down a long rabbit hole, but the point is, at least it's on their radar now. And Palantir, same thing. Like, what is this Palantir? Now they're starting with Peter Thiel. I thought he was just a guy who's bad on Rogan and stuttered and mumbled his way through a 3-hour conversation. It's like, no. That guy is extremely dangerous, and this is what his company is about. So, I mean, I guess if we're going to take a very tiny white pill, like maybe the size of a Tic Tac, it'll be that some of the normies are starting to open their eyes to these agencies or these corporations that are driving the future.
Such a good point, Charlie. And here's where the bait and switch administration comes in, right? Because what happened to USAID? It got absorbed into the State Department. And so Palantir has been a quote unquote third party contractor. Even though it's always rode that public-private partnership fence, it's been a private entity face. Now it's part and parcel of the government. So the bait and switch part is, sure, you can talk about it now that it's a part of the government. But in 4 years, it's just going to be one of the underpinning key systems that allow for efficiency and thorough management of this greatest democracy.
And this is why we started with the point about the feud, because as they were highlighting, this is how this tends, not to say we know for sure, but this is how this tends to go, especially when they recognize people are starting to see through all the BS, all the partisan lies. They do something like that. They create, rather, like you're saying, the average person sees USAID. Instead of changing that, they give you the false dynamic and they allow you to lean into that, thinking that, now it's gone, but they just added something else. And I think that's possibly the whole point about what's going on with Palantir. Is someone else going to jump in?
Yeah, I just wanted to take that white pill, put 2 black pills either side of it, and flip it black, like in Go, because you could argue that the normies talking about it is very much part of the point. I mean, the concept we're talking about here is called the panopticon, right? And I don't know if everybody, probably most of us know the history of the word, but some people in the audience might not. It goes back to the 18th century. Utilitarian philosopher, Jeremy Bentham, invented what he called the perfect prison, which is a circular prison with a single guard tower in the middle. And all the cells are visible to the top of the guard tower at all times. Now, most of the cells, most of the prisoners are not being watched, but they are perfectly aware that any one of them could be. The idea of the panopticon is that the idea you might be being watched encourages you to police yourself. As Larry Ellison said, people are going to be on their best behavior. So in some ways, they have to tell us it's there, or it won't work.
Yeah,
I tend to agree with that. I have trouble with it being. I have trouble with it. The idea that people, I mean, not to say again, take the black pill that anytime any people are waking up, it's always a psyop, et cetera, because I see those people out there and I'm not totally in agreement with that. But yeah, of course, it makes me a little skeptical or questioning why it's safe now. I'm not going to name any names, but there are definitely a lot of big podcasts and folks who I know lots of people here were pointing out Palantir connections prior to the election, and they were all still there and pretty obvious in my mind. I know I wrote a lot of articles about that. And Ryan, I know you did hours and hours of coverage of this and others here. And now 6 months into the thing, everybody's willing to talk about Palantir and Peter Thiel, and it's become safe now. And so, yeah, good that more people are talking about it. Good that the hairdressers talking about it. And maybe there's some seeping into normie mind out there, but also it is good, I think, to remain skeptical and question, or, just even have a critical mind about why it's happening at this time. And I did want to go into some Doge and Peter Thiel in a minute, but Charlie, I think, did you have something you want to add?
No, I'm good. Thank you.
Well, Derek, before you do that real quick, just since you mentioned it, I just think this is humorous and we don't have to spend time on this, but the point is about, remember a lot of people, almost everybody here was calling out, a lot of things, but in Palantir being a focal point before all this, and it was black pill purity test. I just thought it's very funny now, and I hate to take pleasure in the chaos that's happening between the MAGA community, but to see the way that they're responding to this stuff now is interesting to me, where Cat Turd came out and said, pay close attention to all the people who don't have President Trump's back right now. And I said, this is what a purity test actually looks like. Sycophant clowns like this guy tried to say that what we were doing was exactly, or I said what we were doing when we tried to warn you about exactly what's taking place was the purity test. I just think it's interesting to see how much what's just happened is exposing the kind of hollowness, the hypocrisy around, and in my opinion, is all partisan like extremism, the team sport politics side. So I thought that's important to point out because it's hard to battle something like that when they've got so much influence and it's all like personal identity politics, woke left, woke right. All right, go ahead.
Well, and again, just real quick, it's like 3-card money, but it's 3-card psyop money. So if it's okay to talk about Palantir now, that means nobody's talking about Larry Ellison or Sam Altman or the Stargate going international at this point, the mRNA platform Stargate going international at this point. There's, a pick-up oligarch if Elon Musk or if, Peter Thiel are taken front and center. Well, hey, look, there's still 3 other guys from the PayPal mafia that are embedded within the Trump administration that aren't garnering all the headlines. But like Carlin said, you don't necessarily need an organized conspiracy when everybody involved all went to the same schools, is all part of the same clubs, all have the same overarching, goals and stuff like that. If Musk and Thiel are taking all of the oxygen out of the information, everybody else in the PayPal mafia is running around rampant, not to mention Howard Lutnick, not to mention all of the other people that are part and parcel of advancing the panopticon-esque agenda that we've been talking about on the panel so far.
Oh, and if we're going to speculate as to who might be pulled into this next, I'm going to put my money on Lucky Palmer. Because he's wears the Hawaiian shirt, he's got the branding. He's just a wacky, kooky nerd who, he's looking out for America, and he's building these. You can easily see him getting incorporated in, and like Steve says, when the magician wants you to look at his right hand, you have to keep an eye on his left hand. That's what that's pulling the bird out of the back pocket or whatever. So So it's in some cases, it's not necessarily who they're talking about now. It's who who the spotlight is no longer on. Exit stage right, and now that guy is off to go do his thing. Musk leaves. What's he up to? Well, he's up to whatever the agenda is, but he doesn't have that massive spotlight on him. He might not be the best example because he's always putting a spotlight on himself, but some of the lesser characters, as they exit the stage, they're now free to do what they're doing without the audience watching.
So I'm so glad you brought up Lucky Palmer, because he's going to play into really what I wanted to talk about. We haven't hit on Lavender. We haven't hit on the fact that Palantir is very much a part of the Five Eyes operation. So it is an international intelligence network, and Lavender, which just picked through AI 30,000 plus quote unquote terrorists, aka targets, that can be taken out by autonomous drones and machines made by Lucky Palmer. I think that's really important. So I was really unaware of Lucky Palmer probably until the last few months, when all of a sudden he's on a media train for his company Anduril. And where there are a lot of parallels with what Charlie was just saying there, with AI, autonomous weapons, and faces, Palmer's thing is that he wants the United States to be the world's gun store for these autonomous weapons, kind of, further putting out that plausible deniability circle. Well, again, Palantir is supposedly a private company, right? They're working with all these different government agencies as well, and they're targeting these people. Well, what kind of weapon systems are going to be utilized? Lucky Palmer's weapon systems. We're not just talking about traditional drones, air, water, you name it. He's doing it right now. And this is like the hip kid that brought us the Oculus Rift, owned by Meta now. So you see how incestuous this whole thing is. But it's okay, because he's got a cool little goatee. He wears sandals. He's in a Hawaiian shirt. And, he talks hip. What's he, like 30 something?
He's got an ironic mullet, Jason. What more could you ask for in a tycoon?
It's pretty wild. Again, but this shows you, and I'm just getting familiar with this guy. He seems on the level that he is a very intelligent person and at the helm of all these things. But at the same time, all right, he's the guy that put out what becomes commercialized VR and like probably the biggest format out there. We know the Defense Department, DARPA, has had virtual reality for decades. We know that even side by side, you can go and see these rather crude machines where they were running film reels side by side, I think in the 50s, and had these type of VR experiences where you were like driving around. Obviously a lot more crude today, but that was commercially available then. So again, is this an anointed one? I mentioned Peter Thiel earlier. I briefly said Sean Parker. For those that don't know who Sean Parker was this kid who the CIA tried to recruit when he was 16, turned it down. All of a sudden, he creates Napster. And not only does he create Napster, that turns into Spotify. And he's the Justin Timberlake character in the Facebook movie there. So it should show you how influential that guy becomes. And look, and by the way, Bilderberg attendee, never a steering member. I think he went once or twice. But to me, that illustrates the fact that, hey, maybe Sean Parker did turn down the CIA. But do you think the CIA gave up on Sean Parker? That's kind of my thing. It's like, whether you want to work for them or not, I see the boost of the software and the social media that he was involved in. It's hard for me to believe that there wasn't somewhere along the way that the intelligence agencies maybe at least pushed it along if he wasn't directly involved with them. And I'll cut it short there.
I often wonder, especially today with like the independent media overlap, how many people involved in that field don't know that they're being used or played. I think that's maybe the majority of what's going on. And I think that's a new kind of angle where these things go. And the same kind of point, you just don't know if it's just willful ignorance. Maybe they aren't even aware that's just funding that they're happy to take without even looking into it. We see that. And I'm talking about the side you're addressing, Jason, but it's also the same thing in independent media. But so it's interesting to think at every angle. Even what we discussed just today, it's hard to ignore that all of this seems to have been long-term intelligence created startup entities, where they kind of place everything into position. You mentioned Palantir, total information awareness, Oracle, the same idea, MainCore we haven't talked about yet, or Lucky Palmer, and I mean all these different points. I mean, you could argue it's just coincidence that they all had the origin point with intelligence that, that's hard for me to wrap my mind around, and then of course we could overlap that with the bigger international picture with other international players that are really, really invested in the tech field and surveillance and all sorts of different things. So why don't we talk? Oh, go ahead.
Don't you find it funny that the origin stories are very similar? Freshman nerd in his Harvard dorm room starts a transformational technology company with stolen technology, takes it and it goes public and winds up making billions of dollars. Who am I talking about? Am I talking about Bill Gates? Am I talking about Mark Zuckerberg? Because it's the same origin story, identical. Or I started it out of my garage in Silicon Valley, like HP or like Apple or whoever. Google started it out of the garage. Something about these garages. I think really, if they want to give it one deviation, less connective tissue to the government, they just run it through the venture capital firms on Sand Hill Road.
And that was part one of a very, very important discussion on only Palantir, but artificial intelligence in general. Love the Independent Media Alliance, folks. Thumbs it up, subscribe, share. Check us out over at patriot.tv. Consider supporting the broadcast down below. And remember, it is not about left or right. It is always about right and wrong. I love you guys, and we'll see you on the flip side.